Guten Tag, willkommen. I'll do 20 seconds on me. Nest Digital Engineering, we're a global company and we make digital products and digital platforms. And I work mostly across the US and Europe, a little bit of Asia. You can tell from my accent, I'm based in London and we have an office here in Munich. I thought I'd pick quite an interesting, challenging headline there to challenge everyone to turn up and see if I've got the magic answer. We'll see at the end. You can let me know. It's a topic everyone has something to say about. It's out there. Everyone wants the answer. And whether you're trying to come up with a data monetization or a data strategy, I think I've got something to say, I hope. A few thoughts on what I've observed in the world. And as we conclude, hopefully some steps of how you might make use of some of those thoughts. So I'll start with, I straddle two camps, business leaders, technology leaders. Do business leaders understand the data that they hold and the value that's in it? Do they sometimes hand that over to technology people and ask them to come up with the answer? And do they acknowledge that business people and technology people have very different views of the world? And the secret source of a company's value of their data is not about big data architecture or the plumbing of how you tie that together. It's about the very essence and the value that people will find in that data. So I'd always challenge business leaders when they're having those discussions about their data strategy to ask always, who's going to buy this? Why would they buy it? What would they pay for it? And why would they care, right? It's a dose of reality that I always think is important. Now I'm going to have to hit the space bar here. I only have one text slide and this is it. This is my agenda. Do it in two halves. Number one is my kind of observations of the world that I live in and the things I've learned and the companies that I deal with. Some of it, some of my own experience, some of it from discussions that I have. Set the scene in part one, and part two is actually how about doing it for yourself? What can you do with some of those insights? How can you go back to your companies and start applying some of those lessons wherever you are on that curve of data maturity? So let's start setting the scene. I got helped a little bit by The Economist's headline this weekend, which set the scene nicely. Data, the 21st century oil. These are all the platforms which I'm not going to focus on today, but they are built on data. They're kind of marketplaces where they don't really have any actual assets other than the fact that they have an audience. And is data, in that analogy, the same as Standard Oil, which 100 years ago had to be broken up? So there's all kinds of issues around who owns the data, who has access to the data, the security of the data. I'm not going to touch on that today. I'm just going to talk about business value that's locked in data. I'm not even going to talk about, the whole parallel subject of organizing, storing, managing, accessing data, a very important thing. My tenet here is that data brings power and value to your organization, but similarly, data has the power to kind of destroy you, I guess, if it's breached or copied or pirated. So let's talk about how real companies in the real world go about finding, the gold at the end of the rainbow. I want to talk actually about not those platform companies, but real companies. I guess in a German context, that would be a BMW car, a Lufthansa airline, Siemens MRI scanner, or even an Aldi superstore. These are companies with this legacy that Google and Facebook don't have, a boring legacy of actually making things. Such a hard job to actually make things and support things, but the data that around that is pointing to the future of some of these companies and how they become part of a valuable ecosystem to their customers and attract them to stay with them and tell their friends about them in much the same way as you would about Facebook. Techniques, so we're going to talk about how you go about unearthing and discovering value in your data, this magic entity. What's the value? How do we find value? There's two general approaches that I observe. I've split it simply into two. On the left-hand side there, however clumsy the imagery, activities that generate insights from your data and from your customers. And that, in that essence is data analysis, analyzing your data, getting your hands dirty, feeling your way around it, having it try and speak to you about what it says. That's analysis, that's modeling, that's, building plans, having ideas and testing them out with the data you have. It's kind of a raw material that you have to work with, like a child in a sandbox. It's fun if you get into it the right way. So there's looking at it from that angle. And on the right, we've got the other angle, which is to take the data as a raw material and fuse it or integrate it with something else. Now that might be market data, it might be open source, government data, it might be some weird and wonderful sources of which I'm going to talk a bit more later, but together that adds value and ends up conveying insight and information to support managerial decisions, and in this instance it's interactive dashboards. I just go back to that simple definition. Data just sitting around as raw data, it probably has value to you as a company, but of its own, it's not that valuable in the world as an asset that you can make money from. It's when you imbue that with relevance and purpose that it becomes information that people get to use it and do things with. So these are the two main approaches to what we see going on there with data. I come on to this classic chart. It's so simple, but it conveys so much. This is a legendary Intel CEO, Andy Grove, in his 1998 book, Only the Paranoid Survive, and I think it's more relevant than ever. The central thesis of that book is that every single company faces a moment, a strategic inflection point, where the stars align and basically they must make a massive change. They must. There's no way around it. And coasting along is not going to... Some radio program on my phone, and I'll just switch that off for a moment. That's distracted me slightly where that came along. Right, but it's gone. Okay, back to my theme. So there's a moment where, and especially in this digital age, where so much data is available to so many and so quickly and so easily in web, social, mobile. If you don't make a decision at this moment, if you don't study what the data is telling you, if you don't absorb the lessons that your customer's behavior is doing and make this bid to reach new heights in your business, then you don't get to stay the same anymore. You decline. I guess his thing was a little bit of, you die, you crash to earth horribly quickly in this diagram. It might take, a year or 2, 3 years, but ultimately the course is set if you're not looking at your data. If you're not looking at your data, there's two ways that you're going to die there. Someone else is looking at the same data and making bets on how they're going to use that as their boost to overtake you. Or if you're not looking at it, you're not going to be ready to adjust quickly enough when your customers fall out of love with you, as they will, because in the age of change, loyalty is almost gone in a digital age. What is loyalty? I think I may be loyal to a couple of products like WD-40 or Sudocrem for my baby's bottom. They're great products. They'll always be great products. But do I have loyalty to my bank account or my insurance provider or my TV package when every 6 months there's a new and competing differentiator that's changing? It's fierce, the competition out there. It's great for me as a consumer. It's very hard for a business, but there's no way to hide from that if you've got a digital product. You've got to compete and get on with it. And the way to compete to get on with it, I've taken a manufacturing angle here, is about personalization. Data points the way to mass customization, to mass personalization. Making something relevant and important to me and making it not about you, the company, talking in very general terms, which I can't kind of get my hooks into. It feels like you're talking to me. If you talk to me as a company, then I start to feel you're smart. I start to feel you're smart more than I start to freak out that you're so relevant to me, and how do you know that? The value I get is more about me feeling happy that you're in tune with me and saving time than it is that you're potentially stalking me and know way too much about me. So touch a little bit there on loyalty. Companies use data to build their sales strategy, their CRM program. Many companies, supermarkets especially, have done well out of building loyalty programs. It's a nice concept that you get loyalty from bonding with a company. But basically what happens in an age where everyone has a loyalty program? I've flown across the Atlantic a lot recently on like 7 different airlines. I'm in all the loyalty programs. Makes no difference to me which airline I take. It's actually based on which one's more convenient. There is no loyalty because I'm in all of the programs. So something we've been talking to Gartner a lot about lately is the concept that how do you build loyalty to your company as a much higher goal than building loyalty to your loyalty program, right? Building loyalty to your company by always coming and offering something more, by showing you're improving and you're thinking about your customers, the way you stay ahead on that curve. And you do that by mining your data to, it's all about the way you study that data with precision, efficiency, and get this mass customization to keep delivering relevant things to me. Right, so that's my kind of overview of the state of the world. Now I'm going to start on my Harvard Business School way of doing it by case studies kind of thing. Excuse me a second. Just take a few case studies that I find very exciting, and hopefully you do too. and the things that we've learned. I love the story of Zillow. I'm not sure how much you know of Zillow, but it's a real estate property valuation empire platform in the US now. And here's the story about why they've done so well from data. Obviously, this is about turning data into revenue, and they started in 2006, 2016, $850 million of revenue, and it could be actually a lot higher, but for the fact that they're buying lots of their competitors to become the main player in that industry. It's built on a really simple simple, wonderful construct from nothing, really. They've got no assets. They're a platform, like the guys in the Economist front page there. They took some data that was not doing anything. It was lying around. And that data is about the value of your house. It's a very primal set of data. It was locked up in various real estate groups across the US. And also the government had statistics on houses, house building across the US, numbers of houses. So their goal to take some of the openly sourced data from the government and start collecting it from these groups was to put a valuation on every house in the US, which didn't exist. And I say it's a very primal thing. They got this concept still there, the Zestimate, right? And here's the primal thing, it's this. How much is my house worth, right? How much is my brother's house worth? And how much is my boss's house worth? Now, we all live in Miami. How much do I get for the same money if I took this job offer in San Diego? Do I get more or less for my money? It's a funny way we have of kind of valuing our whole life, really, on where we live and how comfortable we live with our families and the weather. But it is very primal, right? Your home. Before 2006, there was no way to do that in the US. They've got, they're a media business. They've built an audience. They've got millions of people on there curiously working out their futures at the moment. And they've got buyers and sellers and renters, and now they're selling insurance and mortgage products. But it's all built on the value, the information that they've put into that data by making it relevant. And they made it relevant by adding, obviously, it's about valuation of houses, number of bedrooms, location. That's the core stuff. But the way this points to the future is, it's a very societal view of everything, which I quite like. If you start adding that data up with, the performance of school districts and the hospitals, the crime statistics in that area. In the UK, we have this funny one, which is if your house in one of the main cities is near a little Waitrose supermarket, it's worth more than ever before because other people want to live in houses like that. Obviously, then you start to say, well, if I move out of the city, do I get more for my money? How far do I have to go before I get the right payoff and the right lifestyle and can still come to work? If we look even further ahead, 9 to 5 office jobs are changing, people freelancing from home, driverless cars, all kinds of things in the future. They're all going to be reflected on here in the way that property prices change. So the data set that they own, the way people are migrating and job patterns that come out, there's even more value locked in there than they even know about at the moment. So I love the story there. Every data point is a reflection of where we live and how we live. It's a pretty big data set they've got there. So that's turning data into revenue, turning data into savings. I have the Edge building here in Amsterdam, which is trumpeted as the world's smartest, most intelligent building, and everyone living a super luxurious air-conditioned life for minimal cost. So they're all taken care of nicely in that building of the future. That turns into using data to use energy efficiently. And I have a story from one of our clients, which I like at the moment. So one of our customers is solar turbines. They make precision manufacturing giant industrial turbines. They're part of the Caterpillar group. We've been working with them for a few years on their kind of digital future because we collect the data from all the sensors on those turbines and we start to help them preempt when maintenance might be required. The data tells you how the turbine is performing and what efficiency it's performing. And they sell turbines. They're a company that has a product and they sell it. But as they look forward to a future and trying to build service revenues on that, power by the hour as they call it, some interesting things happen. They got a call from a paper mill in Australia who used one of their turbines. I won't do the accent, but they call up and they say, well, I will do the accent. Utility bills through the roof, mate. They're paying so much money for their utilities, they can't believe it. Could you study the data and help us work out why we're spending so much on the utilities that's powering our plant? Well, it only took a few days to actually understand from the way that they were using the turbine that basically they were using the turbine 100% full gas the whole time. And they weren't really taking any account of whether it was the weekend, where there was a full staff on, whether the orders justified the amount of paper they were producing. They were not using any of the precision controls they had on the turbine, they just had it on. So it didn't take that long to build up a profile of their usage and some suggestions of how, if you only put it at 50% at the weekend, 60% in the middle of the week, you start to save savings bills. Well, 1 month later, looking forward, they're saving $3, $4, $5 million a year just on that one plant. And the wonderful part of that is they've got 50 plants around the world. That's $100 million saving if you multiply it around, that they've just learned that lesson. Good for the planet as well, right? There's another nice benefit to everyone. And of course, our customer, Solar Turbines, have now discovered this energy optimization service that they hadn't necessarily thought about, that they get to go and have a conversation with all their other customers about how they can save money through optimizing use of the turbine. It's a service. It's a new revenue stream. I wasn't going to talk too much about Google, but this is another great story. I mean, Google bought Nest, so, equally this one had some benefit to Nest. But this is another age-old problem, another age-old data that suddenly become more valuable in the world. And it goes something like this. The central theory there was that this is all about the thermostat, right? They call it the jewel on the wall, but a thermostat hadn't changed much for 70 years, just a little lever that you move. And they worked out, really, it was responsible for controlling about 50% of America's energy bills. 10% of all the energy consumed in the US. Several $1 trillion of energy going on just on this little lever that had never changed. So of course, as a product, Nest, it's amazing. Of course, it's a sign of things to come. Embedded IoT in the home, always on, real-time data, track it from anywhere, adjust it, precision, save money on heating and air conditioning. Amazing product. But turning this into a new business, that's what that has done. That's created a whole new ecosystem really around it of intelligent sensors in your home. But if you start to join that up to the story I just told about solar turbines, this is what it could do for the world really, and I think it's definitely a sign of things changing. You're probably aware in Germany, E.ON and RWE, much like other big utilities, historic utilities, are struggling with their strategic future, right? They've always been the people that have to provide power all the time to everyone. Governments around the world subsidizing solar power and renewables, and getting a big boost, those industries. But when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, everyone relies on the utility guy to pick up the power. They've got not the very glamorous end of the deal there. And until battery technology comes up, they have to be paid for somehow. So the whole pricing mechanism is definitely changing. And the way I look at it with Nest is that it might not be what everyone's taste, but there is a kind of a competitive differential pricing thing going on here. If it gets cold and 3 million people reach for their heating and turn it on, rich people can afford it, poorer people or other people, other sections of society, traditionally will get a shocking bill a few months later and think, I can't pay that, that's incredible, how did it get so high? Happens all over the world. Well, somewhere in there, the intelligence that you get from here can preempt and predict that and either tell people, are you sure, because this bill is going to be this high, maybe you and the family could put some jumpers on, or maybe you could wait 2 or 3 hours and turn the heating on when it's quiet, when it's cheaper, and if your house is a good insulator of the heat, you'll find a way of benefiting that way. It's all about providing customers choice, and it's all set on the data of how people heat and air condition their homes. So, another story of a new business opportunity in a whole new industry as yet untapped. The last one in this little theme here is turning data into new business lines, and I wanted to talk here about almost international expansion. PayPal, payments provider in the US, very mature, very well known. It's a great business in the US-centric business. They only have 2 data points that they track: how many customers they have and how much each customer spends. It's a very simple business in that context. And they realized in a very competitive market in the US, their opportunities for spectacular growth are somewhat limited because it's quite mature and there's a lot of good competition around. So they started looking abroad for how they were going to grow the concept around the world. Obviously, they studied the data of how much and how long it would take to build the PayPal footprint, overseas. They decided to make this acquisition of Zoom, 2015, I think it was. And suddenly they've got PayPal is now available with Zoom in 200 countries. So that's an interesting story of how they did it. The fascinating thing, once again, I keep coming back to changes for society. This is big stuff this data's doing, is this. The data that they hold on the money flowing in and out, particularly of the US from immigrants, it's a hot topic obviously at the moment. It's incredible, right? $600 billion industry, remittance in the US. It's bigger than the airline industry, the amount of money that people send from jobs in the US back to their countries. The patterns that they are collecting data on, the people arriving in a country, taking a low-paid job, taking 3 jobs, changing the way they send money home, paying their grandmother's electricity bill in Sao Paulo so that it doesn't go through the hands of intermediaries who all take skims off the top. That's a new industry in itself. But the patterns that they're building now of the way that humanity effectively is changing the way, the countries they go to, the way they establish themselves, the profile, they hold data on the numbers of people earning money, sometimes obviously not really completely illegally or with visas, far ahead of anyone else, far ahead of governments and things like this. So they're almost a bellwether for the way the humans are moving around the planet. And once again, there's the service revenue in that data that they haven't even tapped yet. So that's my first half. That's my assessment of the world we live in and what's going on. So now let's get to these concrete steps of what you all could do when you get back to your businesses, your real businesses that do real things and make products and build services for people. And this is something that we see time and time again. I'm trying to illustrate there, maybe clumsily once again. Seeing the wood for the trees, that guy can only see one tree, right? He can't see the woods. He's too close to it. He needs some help. And I see this time and again. Big businesses around the world, billion-dollar businesses, trying to engage digital audience, digital future, make money out of data, these themes. It's amazing how many people I meet who've worked for that company and worked their way up. And lovely, smart people, all of them, well, not all of them, but some of them, most of them, they've been there 10 years, 15 years, working for that company. So while they are an expert at that company, people, processes, the audience, they're expert at that. They very often have a very narrow focus of the world, and they always, it's a classic business talk, isn't it? But they have an inside-out view. They think business first, customer second, and they become institutionalized to the corporate view of the world. And they forget that when they leave home and go home, they're actually consumers as well. A couple of examples of that. I've worked with quite a few airlines who have hired great designers and great engineers, very capable people, smart people, who after many years, just working on an airline project, just become institutionalized about airlines and comparing themselves to one or two other airlines. They forget that people who fly on planes, stay in hotels, book holidays, buy cars, do all kinds of things that are unrelated to airlines, and the way that they measure their experience is in those terms, not just comparing this airline with this airline, which is what most airlines think. So they need an expert view to come and help them remember that sometimes. They think people care more about their airline than I do, unfortunately. I'll do a quick one on Expedia. Expedia, once again, a platform like Zillow, and I like the idea that they were a disruptor when I started using them 15 years ago. They're a marketplace, they aggregate data, great visibility on flights. Well done, Expedia. They built a massive business on it. And of course, they've gone on a spending spree, HomeAway, hotels.com. So they're spending a lot of money on AI and chatbots. So they're heading in the right direction. But can they do it quick enough? Where are they on that curve? I say, in my life at least, and I know many people like it, there's a whole new movement of self-serve building a holiday, right? We're pretty mature 15 years into the internet revolution. We know how it works, right? I've got a large family, so for me it always starts with the window of opportunity that I have and the accommodation that I need, which has all kinds of crazy needs before I do anything. And only when I've secured that do I then go about talking about flights and car rentals and all the associated elements. I can't go to Expedia and try and tell them all that on my terms. I'm pretty confident that I can do that myself. It's probably more time that's worth for me and try and bend that into Expedia's way of doing things, which I believe is still an inside-out way of doing it. There's opportunity out there for someone else to take over that role of doing exactly what I want on my terms and saving me time. That Expedia need to, shake it up a bit. They need to change the way that their platform works to be able to cope with that direction that people are taking as they build, group holidays on social media and things like that. It's just a different way of doing things. It's much less transactional and much more ambitious what people do. And the last one in this area, I'll just say financial services, potentially the worst of all for being inside out. 15 years in one institution, money flowing in, a certain generation of investors that never even ask for statements beyond what they get through the post each year. Well, the next generation, the Generation X and the millennials, they want real-time digital interactions with their data. They don't want to talk to you until they want to talk to you. And these institutions have never really been able to talk to anyone. They just push information out and hope people are saying, we're trustworthy, we've got a great legacy. They need to reinvent themselves, and they need an expert outside view to come and tell them what some more customer-facing industries are doing for them to copy. So how do you go about engaging an outsider? There's these three options, pretty simple. All three have got pros and cons. You hire some expertise, and that's got merit. One or two people can make a massive difference, of course they could. Against that, you've got the concept that maybe they become institutionalized if they're not strong enough personalities. Maybe it takes quite a long time for them to understand what needs to change. And then, what if they leave? So there's some risks in hiring. Buying a company with all that expertise, you've got the risk of cultural mismatch. And of course, if you're Google buying Nest or Waze or any of those kind of companies, DeepMind, it's going to cost you billions of dollars. So buying can be quite expensive. You need deep pockets for that. So I'm the champion of saying you partner, but I'm the champion of that for very digital reasons. I think partner maybe it's a bit like dating. Maybe it's online dating or Tinder or something like this, right? Why not try for 2 months the relationship, a try before you buy? You get to meet each other, you get to agree some cost and some fixed terms and some approach and some demonstration every week of what's going on. If you don't like it, you get to split up. You can agree that at the start. And if you do like it, you get to kind of cement a more longer term relationship. But truthfully, it's probably the quickest way in 2 months that you can, hire a team, get them in, say, this is what you need to achieve over a fixed period, and here's what we're going to do. And while you're doing it, can you please educate my team internally, or educate me, or spread a lot of your knowledge, or leave some things behind. So you can set the contract in that digital relationship with a partner. That's the way to start getting your organization thinking more digitally. Second one then, so you've brought some expert outside view in, and now you've got some ideas that you want to try and build your digital and data strategy. There's 2 parts to this sentence. Discover and validate the user need, which matches what you want to do as a business. Every business finds it way easier to talk about what they want out of the deal than what their customers want out of the deal. So it's really easy to describe that, but not necessarily easy, especially maybe for those financial services companies I discussed, that to find out what their customers want. How do you do it? How do you take your idea and validate that with users? I'll tell you a little story which goes, I read a lot of RFP documents. RFP documents, 100 pages long sometimes. Always theme that I get from them, maybe having read 10 or 15 in the last 2 years, they're always written by someone in IT. And when you get to the end of it, you think, this RFP is actually a recipe to remake what they have already. Maybe on a bit more of a modern technology, and maybe there'll be a few savings in licensing, but they're kind of writing down exactly what they know. And usually on the last page, they say, and can you make it really user-centric so that customers love it? And can you make sure that there's amazing data reporting in so we can make loads of money out of the data? Always an addendum. The RFP never really ever mentions humans, and technology surely is something that we use as a slave to what the humans need, for the moment anyway. So they always miss out the people, and they always miss out the intelligence that is already held in their organization, but people that use the system they've just described and have a long list of complaints. So very rarely are they able to put forward the research they've conducted already on what people have said about how they work around it, how they use it, bits they like, and the long list of things they hate. Amazing that companies don't capture that. Quite easy to gather intelligence that they have. I'm amazed when I see these companies, and going back to that curve, I can see the genetic programming if this company is a Blockbusters or a Netflix, just from the way that they're thinking about their future, whether they're remaking themselves again in their own image or thinking bigger and trying to be more friendly to the customers that they want to attract. Simple, really. Gather all the intelligence that's around you as quickly as you can before you start anything on this initiative. Why would you miss that? Why would you not tackle that? And then going ahead and actually doing it, there's a couple of options to do this. I've put up this as an example, which I'll get to at the end of this anecdote. Taster-Made, it's a great video sharing site built on its users, user-generated content based around food and people's common love of food in the US, going great guns because it is built on what its users want. But the 3 options I put here about how you discover and validate the needs, well, these are they. The first one is a classic. It's been going 30, 40 years. You've got these things called ethnographers, but you may know them as the people that, conduct a day in the life study. They follow a key employee around and work out what they're having for breakfast and what they're planning to do at work that day, what they achieve at the end of the day, how they use technology. I've seen lots of research conducted in that way, and it's fascinating, and it definitely reveals all sorts of things. But it can be very expensive, and it's very narrow. There's only so many people you can follow. It's one way to do it, to understand what's going on in at the coalface, the kind of thing where the CEO walks amongst all the people and maybe in disguise to learn what's going on. You can do surveys, but even as I say the word survey, it sounds so old-fashioned. Surely it's only really the oldest people in society that have time to complete surveys. And when someone fills a survey in, are they really telling you the truth, or are they just after the ticket or the $100 that you offered them? Not sure about surveys. The obvious answer to me is you look at the data. Look at the data of your usage. You don't even need to tell anyone you're looking. All of those trends on your customer data, your retention, your churn, all of these rates, the data talks to you all the time, and studying that, what's hot, what's not, what's going down, what's going up, will reveal to you everything, well, as much as lots of that does, at least as a great starting point. Once again, you should not miss it. And of course, it's cheaper than all of that, and if it's got millions of data points in it, it's much wider rather than narrow. So obviously you should look at your data. An industry is maturing, even banks are looking at their churn rates, studying the number of calls from their call center from that account holder, understanding that they're liable to churn and making adjustments in their marketing messages. So it's happening, and it's obviously still much easier to retain a customer than to find a new one. So studying the data to find the bad stuff is a starting point, but while you're in there, you'll find the good stuff. And data mining the good stuff, what people want more of, is all the rage, in media and publishing. I do a lot of work in, National Geographic have found a great business growth in making short videos on their platform because parents like allowing their children to learn that way. And a parallel to the video that's about National Geographic is one at food that's done at Taster-Made. So that's validating a user needs. So you've got your idea, you've validated it with some users. How do you make the idea better? It might be quite simple to start with, and this is a simple rule of thumb, which is someone's already done this everywhere, right? It's not like these institutional people always think it's happening for the first time and has not happened anywhere. I'll take the example of, I've spent a bit of time in China recently. WeChat's just incredible. So Facebook, Snapchat, WhatsApp, they're all miles behind WeChat. And WeChat, for various quirks of the Chinese economy, they were there at the right time as coverage got going and overcome bureaucracy in a massive step. But it's this ubiquitous platform that everyone's on it and will only get stronger because everyone is emailing files to each other, booking tickets, insurance policies, finding dates. Everything you do is all on WeChat. So it's such a rich universe inside WeChat. So now, not all of that may be applicable to the German market. I'm sure it's very much different to lots of it, but there's no harm in looking, is there? And every time you're trying to do something in your country, how did it work in Brazil or South Korea? Go have a look at what's been done in another country, research it and find what you can learn. And I'm still amazed how many big companies I meet who've just never even thought of doing that. Incredible. Insights that you find in the same vein that you might not have thought before. This is actually my car and my family. I've got a VW transporter, so I bought German, just so you know. I've got 6 children. The only way I bought that car was it needed to have 3 car seats across the middle, right? You can't find that information on dealer automotive websites. I found that information on a website in the UK called Mumsnet, which is made up of millions of mums exchanging information about how you bring a family up. So we have clients in the US who trade cars, second-hand cars, new cars, some billion-dollar companies. I'm like, I found out how to buy my car from Mumsnet. I didn't look at any of your websites. I don't want to talk to a guy about brake horsepower. Just need to fit 3 car seats across the middle. Now, none of these guys ever thought that was even possible. There's a very macho world of selling cars, but it's definitely true, in the world of Uber and self-driving cars, people don't even aspire to own cars the way they used to. People want a car contract, a bit like a phone contract. Definitely don't want to think about it because it's kind of boring, the way I look at it. But, I've ended up with a great car and we have a great time in there. One other insight, I spend all this time working out how I measure car seats in there. People that own these cars that are families, have big families, why don't they make car seats? I never thought if it was mounted in there, I'd have bought it even quicker and told more of my friends to buy it. So there's another unmet need that I'm crazy making things happen and hiring car seats in different countries. Why don't the auto manufacturers think more about families that have that to do? So there's needs out there if you look in unusual places is what I'm getting at there. Asking different people awkward questions and not just going with the normal way of doing it is I think, the fun part anyway. Improve the idea with research. Right, last kind of little bit of this here. We're coming to the conclusion here. Rapid prototyping, not a new concept, but amazing how few people do it. Technology people in big companies love spending money on massive things, whether they're going to be useful or not. So you should be wary of that if you're on the business side of the house. We build quite a lot of experience prototypes, which with a bit of research and a few good ideas, 2-3 weeks, you can build an experience prototype. Before you sink money into your new great idea, you've got to build something that you can go show your customers and your potential customers and get them to say, do they get it and do they like it? Everything that comes after that, the technology to make it work, the way to build the data model, the way to seamlessly make them like it more, is an afterthought. You've got to get the idea right first, and I'm still amazed how people miss that it's relatively straightforward for 3 smart people to put something together in 2 or 3 weeks that can. And if you've got 5 different teams doing that, you can get to the best idea quickly before you waste millions of dollars on an untested idea by looking inside out and feeling very arrogantly confident that you know best. There's no need. The users are out there. You can test it. This is way before you get anywhere near to A/B testing and multivariant testing and bandit testing on the internet, which are all ways way down the line of improving what you have. But to get your basic idea right, to get your brilliant basics right, build some prototypes. And I also think as a company, if you get out there a reputation that you are building prototypes, that you are thinking about the next generation products, that's a good message to be sending the world as well. Although one thing about that, a lot of innovation labs have sprung up in the US and the big banks, which I know are all fun places with lots of beanbags and cool guys playing ping pong, but nothing they ever make seems to ever make it into the bank. They're very disconnected. I think they're mostly run as a PR stunt to get in the papers rather than an actual way to change the fabric of the bank. But some of them will get there eventually when they've worked out that that's been, a lot of money not getting anywhere. I picked out 3 rapid prototypes that I think have been, worth knowing the story, but that I love. This is the 1972 Honda Civic. I don't like cars, but I do like this story. So Soichiro Honda, the man with the name Honda, he was a massive disciple of Thomas Edison, and I love this guy in the way he's a bit of a maverick in Japanese industry. He launched this car in the US as a prototype idea. It's small, it's fuel efficient. No one thought it would do very well in the US, and obviously it's going blockbusters. If I'm not mistaken, they still make it now, but that was a bit of a risk in a prototype, and he shook up the US car market and the Japanese car market at the same time, just through his, putting that to market and some base instincts and some brief research that people were ready for it, and the customers adopted it much more than the industry thought they would. Success. This one, Nick Woodman, 2 business ideas in California, both failed, went surfing, clear his head, works out, right, camera on board, surfboard, create magic moments for dangerous sports, the GoPro. Brilliant idea, lovely prototype, next generation prototype is good, and a great product, well done. But the thing that's changed is society that I love, and he couldn't have known that at the time. Of course, that is now the precursor to what's on our dash cams, recording our driving behavior, recording accidents and changing insurance programs. And maybe even more powerfully, that's being worn by police officers around the world now to show the way they interact with possible or real criminals. And it's a much more transparent way. You can't argue with film footage, can you? It's a much cleaner way of running policing around the world. So that's another industry that's formed out of that beautiful small insight. And just to go back to our main theme there, the Facebook, when it started, that's just a little idea for college kids that was adopted by the kids and taken much further than they could have anticipated at the start, just by the fact that people found it so useful. So, there's no higher benchmark. They've done quite well for themselves, it would seem. 2 other things I always mention in prototyping world that are just, great stories. Waze, also bought by Google, using the phone as the node on the network that makes it more intelligent. This is what helps me get the children to school every morning on the thing. It never fails to amaze me how simple and yet how brilliantly clever it is that it keeps, giving me better ways to get there. Of course, there's some finite way where everyone in the world uses Waze that there'll be no more shortcuts because everyone else will be using it. But I think the future of driverless cars will get here before everyone is on Waze doing it. But it's an incredibly intelligent idea from Israel, from a little startup that is now used all over the world. And then the last little representation of what good things come out of humanity. Just in West Africa, the Ebola outbreak, there's a lot of challenges go into this story, but there's something about how wonderful technology was that they were measuring on the mobile phones the number of, well, first of all, they were using text messages to get to people that were impossible to reach to help them understand what dangers they were in with Ebola, but also the contracts and the GPS on the phones were telling them about the movement of people and crossing borders and where they should spend the finite resources to help block it. Of course, at one stage it was going to be a pandemic which was going to take over the world, but thankfully it managed to snuff it out. It didn't work completely brilliantly, the interaction between the mobile phone networks, the NGOs, the scientists, the governments, but the basics were there, and there's something in that, as a planet, surely we should be using this data to help us contain things that, scare the living daylights everyone, and have signs all over airports, have you been to West Africa, months after when you've forgotten about it. So, an amazing story there that points to the future. Last slide, back to where I started. I mean, I'm not sure if I managed to convince everyone that I knew what I'm talking about, but that's what's going on in the world as I see it. Those are the options that every business has to kind of counter them. They're very generic in many ways, but hopefully I've added my personal touch onto it. I mean, obviously happily take any questions, but there I am. If you want to tell me your story about how you figure against any of those, I'd be delighted to hear it. And when I put this up afterwards on the site for the organisers, I have put a kind of a questionnaire at the end, which I won't go through into detail, but there are some basic tick boxes about how companies go about monetizing data, which is choosing, do we price it, do we give it away, do we partner with it, do we form a consortium? And secondly, do you look at data as an asset in itself? Do you experiment with it? Do you play with it? Is there someone in charge of it? All kinds of things, ways you should look at data. So I'll put those up there in the end. But ultimately, that was me. Thank you very much for listening. Do we take questions, anyone? Hello.
Yeah, I can have a remark.
Yes.
I'm Delphine. I'm from La Poste in France, and I was in charge, in fact, of enhancing. This was one of the digital challenges in Turbine, is really to get revenue from our data and to grow opportunities from data and big data. And in fact, when you say, well, now we have to decide on data, or well, people say, well, we have always decided on data. But in fact, I think that going on big data is really much more a cultural impact within the company, because big data is real time.
Yep.
And of course, we have always been dealing with a lot of data to take any kind of decision in our companies. But now it's real time. That means that you are not the boss and thinking, looking at the data and saying, well, this is my decision. No, things can go on in real time through big data. And this is really a very organizational challenge. And for us, for example, it was not a technological issue. We have the data, and we can, for example, predict how many letters at which door it will be. Our challenge is to change the organization in order for the postman to change direction each morning. And well, we have not achieved that, but it's just an example how the big data is mostly a cultural and organizational challenge.
Yep.
And really breaking all the silos in order to get the data gathered in one point.
Right. Thank you for that. That's a great point. I've got one little addition to that, which I absolutely recognise the truth of that story. So data is real time. The other point in that cultural internal change is that it's honest. It doesn't hide the truth. The truth sometimes people don't want to hear, right? And then you're saying that cultural, the hierarchy of management that we've got all the time. You think the person at the top knows the most, right? Making the best decisions. And if that's not true, and some decisions prove to be wrong, then the culture has to be that if this is more of a team effort and experts in each area contribute to a team decision, and the role of that leader is probably different now. It's managing the culture of that management team and the group decisions, and less about we go that way or that way and it's my decision and I die or fall on it, I'd say. So all of that cultural change, especially really big companies where they have a legacy culture that is really uncomfortable to break. But thank you for that. Okay. Great.
So in this room,
Thank you.
we will have, after that, we will have two discussion rounds, one from KC and the other one from Roland. So happy to work with you. And thank you to you.
All right, thank you, no problem. Cheers.